Ladies and gentlemen, hello to everyone in Australia and around the world. I welcome you to the University of Technology, Sydney. Tonight's event is the Global Game Changers, the Big Carbon Rethink. It's dedicated to tackling major world challenges. I would like to begin. Do we still have the music on? Is that just my imagination? Can we funk it down a little bit? It's just, let's take the funk. There you go. I'd like to begin proceedings with an acknowledgement of the ancient land upon which we stand. It's tradition in Australia to pay respect to the land and the people who have lived here for thousands of years at the beginning of any important gathering. Today in the UTS Great Hall we have a packed auditorium, and with us online from around the world we have around 1,000 viewers. I haven't checked that in the last 2 minutes, so don't quote me on that. It hasn't gone through the proper academic review process, but around that. So this welcome extends to you all. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. I'm Craig Rucastle, your host for the evening. I'm probably here because I've made a few documentaries about waste and climate change over the years. The order of proceedings this evening will be a setting of the scene, followed by a broad discussion of challenges and how people on this stage are overcoming them, and there will be a Q&A from the audience here today as well. So if you have your questions, put them in your pocket, keep them for the end, and we'll try and come to you. The setting of the scene will be done by Dr. Alex Thompson, marine ecologist, Science and Technology Australia's superstar of STEM, leading science communicator in the UTS Faculty of Science. Following the overview, Alex will join the panel made up of Dr. Gunther Battinger, industrial engineering and project leader at multinational technology company Siemens, striving towards net zero with SVP manufacturing, factory digitisation and decarbonisation platform Seagreen from Germany, also the director of Estanium. Amy Lowe, the director of brand and marketing for iconic Australian surfwear company Piping Hot, seeking to deliver sustainable and affordable material and product production for clothing, swimwear, footwear and accessories from Australia. Dr. Julia Heiser, co-founder of innovative climate-positive Australian company Ulu, leading production of a natural material derived from oceans able to replace plastics at scale from Western Australia. And Professor Peter Ralph, leading international researcher in the fields of algae biosystems and biotechnology, seagrasses and the adaptation of aquatic plants to warming and acidifying oceans, and Executive Director of the UTS Climate Change Cluster in the Faculty of Science from Sydney. As we face many challenges of climate change, this session looks at the opportunities for the future. We imagine a world where buildings, clothes, homewares, office supplies, playgrounds and electronic equipment, all the products we want to interact with, become carbon sinks, thereby actively reducing atmospheric carbon emissions. Can we get to a place where products that we use or wear are not only decarbonising the atmosphere, but also ensuring that the carbon remains out of the atmosphere? Can our products go from being part of the problem to part of the solution? To set the scene, we welcome Dr. Alex Thompson.
Thank you. Beautiful. Okay, so I have a little bit of a tricky job tonight. So I'm here to provide a little bit of a glossary or a bingo sheet of terms that we're going to be using tonight. And hopefully I'll do this justice. So please bear with me. So firstly, we're going to talk a little bit about a dirty word, and that is carbon. So we know carbon has a bit of a bad rap. It is in fact the stuff that makes up dirt. But it's also the building block of our planet and a compound of absolute opportunity. So I want to start by taking a bit of a step back and understanding our planet's relationship with carbon. So carbon emissions are the leading cause of climate change. Where the carbon comes from is as diverse as the forms that it comes in. So what we refer to as carbon emissions is a pretty lazy way of describing a whole bunch of processes and a whole bunch of compounds, two of which are carbon dioxide, your little Mickey Mouse character up there, and methane. I don't really know what that looks like, but it's the other thing that's up there. So that is, these gases contribute to our planet's greenhouse effect, or ability to trap heat just like a greenhouse. So carbon emitted from our planet, it does so in a lot of different ways. You probably heard about the industries that are most responsible for carbon emissions, but the bulk of carbon dioxide emissions come from fossil fuel sources. So fossil fuels, when extracted from our planet, and used to make things like fuel, synthetic fibre, plastics, all sorts of things, contribute to the way that our planet functions. So over time, these emissions have led to our planet getting a bit of a thicker blanket of gases trapped in its atmosphere. And like anyone that is trapped under a pretty thick blanket, what starts as being pretty nice and cosy soon gets pretty uncomfortable. So we're going to leave carbon for a second, and I'm going to talk about an organism called algae. Algae is a living thing. I'm not going to call it a plant. That's a whole other topic, which a lot of people here could talk for a very long time about. But it's made up of, you guessed it, carbon. So algae appears on our Earth in two main forms. Microalgae, single-celled, tiny little organism that a lot of people try and get out of their swimming pool, and the larger form of macroalgae or seaweeds. Our planet has a really long history with algae. In fact, the reason that our planet even has an atmosphere to begin with is because algae's ancestors worked out a little process called photosynthesis and gave us an atmosphere, which is actually the same way that it captures carbon today. So algae captures carbon dioxide via photosynthesis and holds this carbon within its body. In turn, it produces oxygen. Somewhere between half and 2/3 of the planet's oxygen comes from algae. I'm not going to get into that debate either. And it also produces some pretty important other compounds as well, such as protein, fats, or oils, and carbohydrates. So algae is kind of like a scientist's dream. Being able to capture carbon and then turn it into these really awesome organic building blocks is a really cool process, and then allows us to then turn them into, well, basically anything. So these building blocks allow us to turn it into super exciting things, whereas before that carbon would have existed in our atmosphere, we're now able to form all sorts of different things, such as animal feeds, plastics, fertilizers. Really, the possibilities are endless, all by implementing a nature-based solution that captures carbon, transforming it into useful compounds, and in the process helping us to mitigate climate change. Now, algae is just one solution in our climate change toolbox, but it is a really, really exciting one. So I'm going to leave algae to the side for a second, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we understand how to track where some of this carbon might come from on our planet, how much carbon is in the products that we use, what is the carbon emission history of the products that we use, and how much do we know about the product's carbon life cycle, where it ends up, and what exactly is a lower carbon product. This space is incredibly exciting because it allows for significant innovation when it comes to product development. I am no expert on scope emissions, but as a bit of a brief explainer, because these are things we're going to be talking about tonight, there are three main types of carbon emissions that most organisations will track or account for. You have Scope 1 emissions, which is essentially the stuff that comes out of the factory or things like company vehicles. Scope 2, it covers things like electricity, heating and cooling. And Scope 3 is a bit of a mixed bag because it encompasses a very wide range of emissions, both upstream and downstream activities of a business. So this can include anything from business travel, employee commuting time, all the way through to how products are transported and distributed both to a factory, but also once it's done in the factory, and then also how that product has an end of life. What we can also kind of look at when we look at the different emissions of a product is what happens when a product might be shipped overseas. So what happens when people account for that carbon, and where does that carbon actually end up? In an instance, say we ship a product from Australia to Europe. Beautiful. How do we understand how that carbon's counted? So in Europe, there's a scheme called CBAM, something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which allows for a price of that carbon to be counted into products. However, how Scope 3 forms a part of that cost is a little bit tricky, and something we're going to talk a little bit about today too. So ultimately, products that are derived from carbon capture or that store carbon within them are therefore intrinsically kind of better for the environment and also better for industry. So there it is, the magic stuff called carbon. In the right place, it can work wonders, give us a toolbox for new innovation, and with nature-based solutions like algae, it can be transformed into a wide range of exciting products. If we track it, we can better manage where it ends up and come up with better solutions for managing it. And if we can do all these things, well, that's kind of what we're aiming for, right? So I'm going to hand back to Craig now, and hopefully some exciting discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alex Thompson there. Just while Alex comes back to her seat, Peter, let's just quickly address what's behind you. This is an algae bioreactor. Is this how we're going to grow our algae? We can't use the oceans? I don't know. What's going on there?
Absolutely. This is exactly what we have back in the labs, and this is what industry has. So it's not a green lava lamp. It is actually the way that we grow the algae. So it's a great prop for everyone. So this is what industry will look like in the future.
Is algae going to grow throughout this? Like if we keep talking longer, will we see the algae grow?
No, if we go over next to it and we breathe into it, it'll grow faster. So our CO2 needs to go in there. So
the better your questions, the better the algae that comes out at the end, okay? This is the pressure. All right, now Alex has done a great job of explaining the science there and using algae and carbon. But I want to start at a different level. Over the years, I've seen many great stories about scientific breakthroughs and, we've got these amazing solutions and that kind of stuff. And then years later, I don't necessarily see these things come into play. And so I want to start with that question of how we get it so that we're actually making things like algae get into reality. And I think one of the reasons this hasn't happened over the years is that part of the problem is that companies don't necessarily know, firstly, the carbon footprint of their products. That's part of it. They don't know. They're like mystified by this. And the second part of it is there's not enough incentive for companies to actually be experimenting with new things like algae. So they have to actually be able to count what's in it, and there has to be some kind of pressure to change that. And so as we discussed, CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, is a good example of this. So for instance, if we send some steel from Australia to Europe and we've created it using green hydrogen that's been made from renewable energy, it's going to have a lower carbon footprint. It's going to get less of a charge on it than if we've created the same bit of steel with using oil and gas to send it over. That's the kind of theory there. But how do we actually measure this in the first place? We want companies to be able to measure that. So I'm going to go first to Gunter here. We want companies to be reducing the carbon footprint of their products, but how do companies actually know the actual product carbon footprint? Gunter, you're trying to answer this at Astanium. Talk us through this.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Craig. I mean, that's definitely one of the major challenges we need and be trying to tackle. So gathering accurate and comprehensive supply chain emissions data is definitely one of the biggest challenges in carbon management. And as you said, policies like CBAM, but there are also others. Digital product passports now are putting a lot of pressure on companies to implement these solutions and scalable solutions. What is the situation at the moment? But also, I must say, there is already great progress on the situation. There's a lot of attention on the topic. The broader carbon footprint usually includes two things: the company's manufacturing emissions and the emissions from the upstream supply chain, as we just saw it. So scope 1, 2, and also 3. And the complication here is, of course, getting a baseline to get started. Companies need and have to understand why they need to create a PCF, and it's basically useful if they are embedded in a holistic strategy. But nevertheless, the companies need to go into their bill of material and into their main production process steps and start to determine this product carbon footprint for each component and production step. To do this, you can start to rely on average emissions. So these average emissions you get from data pools. Companies are out there, they are providing average data, and then you are using the rule of 3. So how much material is in my product, and then you go into the database and you look up what is the emissions, the average emission on 1 kilogram, and then you calculate it. What is then the impact on your product, and then the company only needs to sum up the average emissions across the components and the activities. And this is quite a generic average emission, let's say, data, and we call it secondary data. But now, if you really would like to show impact, you need, and we have also seen these on the COP28, you need to go to real data, to primary data, we say. As you just explained, you would like to know when you ship maybe products over to another place, how much emissions I really have generated. So these are the true emissions. And the difference between secondary and primary data can be huge. And we have seen differences up to 100%. Also depends on the methodology you're using. And this is another challenge. So which methodology you're applying. So it is essential then to maximize the share of such primary data, and of course you need to be able to get to this primary data, and to prove then the declared product carbon footprint. And of course you have two sources for the input materials. You can and you need to reach out to your suppliers. You have to simply ask them, tell me what emissions you have generated while producing your component you're sending to me. And the other source is your own factory. You have to go into smart metering, you have to install measurement, and you have to extract the concrete data which you are generating for your product. And so both is a challenge, of course. First of all, do you have the installed technology to measure and then also to distribute it on your products? And the other one is, are your suppliers willing to giving you the information you are asking for them? And can you rely on this data? So these are challenges.
Good. As far as I understand, like, I know that a lot of the time I would look at, if I wanted to look at the impact of a product, I would look at what's called a life cycle analysis. But as you're saying, that's a kind of average thing there. And it doesn't necessarily assess, if your company has gone, we've gone that extra 10 miles down the road, we are far ahead of our competitors, you need to go into what you're doing and looking at the actual data to prove we're doing it better than others. Have you got an example of any industries, perhaps in Europe, that have actually started this process and have started to actually assess their actual footprint? Who is doing this?
So, excellent question. So, who is doing this? First of all, the chemical industry. The chemical industry on a globe. We have contract, and we are working together with Together for Sustainability, which is a chemical association, and they are really going into real data. So you see the chemical industry, of course, they have a huge portion of these emissions, they are going into it. Then also the automotive industry. Here we see it, of course, if you are putting products on the market, the electrical vehicles, you're promoting them and you say you are climate neutral by using these when you are charged them with renewable energies. Of course, then you would like to prove that also the product has a lower carbon impact, because also the battery production in compared to combustible has a much higher impact on emissions. So you need to bring them down also into the car. So then we see then the steel industry, especially in Europe now, as there is two things. Of course, there's the pressure of the government and society, but also our energy prices are very high.
Absolutely. Amy, I want to come to you and piping hot clothes, because at the moment, CBAM applies to things like cement and steel and fertiliser, and as far as I can remember, you don't make piping hot clothes out of those things. So what is driving your journey at Piping Hot to try and come up with alternatives? You know, why are you looking to make more sustainable clothing, or reduce the carbon footprint, or reduce the plastic in your clothing?
It really comes from that deep connection that ocean has, that Piping Hot has with the ocean, and then seeing the degradation of the ocean and feeling like we need to play a role in creating solutions to protect oceans in the future. So our ambitions in this area emerged from a pretty sincere purpose to protect oceans, and then to to help families save money, effectively to be able to provide sustainable surfwear for families.
And did you then have to go on a similar journey that we've been talking about here of going, well, hang on a second, we better assess our product lines and our suppliers and our, all of these different scopes, scope 1, 2 and 3. Did you go through all these processes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gunter talked about a holistic strategy, and we've really applied a holistic strategy. We had to define what we wanted to achieve with our products and what we meant by protecting oceans and helping families save money. We really focused on the product impact using that industry data, because that's the best that was available to us at this time. And we started with recycled polyester in 2018. That was a kind of really interesting experience for us to be able to actually go to our supply chain and say, what would happen if we were to replace virgin polyester with recycled polyester? How do we make this work? And how do we deliver this to our existing customers who are all across Australia buying our product through Target? In that decision, initially it was about really focusing on ocean pollution. But as we started to develop the same strategy across all of our material portfolio, we expanded that to a low impact material strategy, which was looking at measurements of water, energy and waste, which are all relevant to what the ocean impact of our clothes. And emissions is a really key part of that mix, because you can, just recently there's some pretty devastating statistics about the impact of rising temperatures on the Great Barrier Reef and many other areas. So in learning that our decision to move to recycled polyester not only started to take that step away from relying on fossil fuels, on virgin fossil fuels, but also cut our emissions, we were kind of ready to make that apply to all of our different products.
Because recycled polyester is a fascinating thing in a way, because it, from an ocean perspective, it doesn't solve one of the problems you would have had, which is microplastics. Like if I wear my board shorts made out of a fossil fuel plastic and it has microplastics come off, if I use a recycled thing, it's going to have the same problem. But you're right, by changing to recycled polyester, you're going to reduce the carbon footprint substantially. You're going to start solving part of the circular economy and those kind of things. So you realise that it was a difficult journey in a sense. Did you find that? Did you kind of bump into things and go, oh no, this is solving half of our problems but not the others?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all fraught with danger. And then you speak to different scientists who have different views. Gunter spoke about the data. There can be parts where you're thinking about, what you can impact from the design perspective. And at the same time, a lot of the end of life impact of our clothes is out of our control in terms of how often are people wearing our clothes and what are they doing with it and how are they washing it and all of that. So we really focus on the bits that we can control, and our approach is really progress over perfection. If we can, we started with one fibre, we've moved to, more sustainable cotton. We are now kind of had this ambitious step to commit to research with the University of Technology Sydney and Peter's team to be able to develop an alternative to polyester, so we can move away from recycled polyester altogether and solve that problem that you're talking about.
So that's the kind of journey as you go, virgin polyester made from fossil fuels, recycled polyester made from fossil fuels. Now the next step is going, can we make this from algae or other bioproducts? That's where you are at the moment. How far along that journey are you? What secrets can you tell us? It's okay. We'll keep it quiet amongst us. Shh, everyone.
Look, I'd love to be able to talk about this more, but I'm kind of under wraps on that.
Peter, can you tell us then?
I've got nothing to say. Absolutely nothing to say. Amy's the boss.
But you have made some, for instance, footwear from bioplastics and that kind of stuff. Did that utilise algae or other bioplastics at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So all piping hot shoes have 5% of algae in their soles, and the 5% sounds like a very small amount. However, we've got 25% of recycled content in there, and then the remaining part is really so that we can meet the safety standards for footwear. You probably haven't thought about that as a characteristic, but for the polymer to be able to perform to the needs of,
going to the beach and everywhere else that you might need to go with the shoes, we need to mix. 5% is kind of the amount that we can commit to at this point. The thing that was really exciting about that, of adding that 5% of algae into our shoes, is actually that impact, because the algae is actually retrieved from polluted waters, and so it has already cleaned water and air, and then is an alternative to the virgin plastic that we would otherwise put in that portion of the shoe. So it kind of, again, progress over perfection, just put it in there, be able to tell that story, but also for us it's that measurable impact, because we're measuring less water, less energy, less waste for each of our products. So overall, by having every single piping hot product is made from those low impact materials, that means we've got a substantive reduction in water, energy and waste compared to the conventional materials that we were making every single product out of 5 years ago.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what you're measuring, you manage, and you get to step forward that way. Julie, I'll come to you. Can you talk us through what ULU is, and where does it fit into this? You know, are you part of the potential solution for these kind of companies?
Yes, so thank you very much for inviting us to present here. So ULU, in a nutshell, what we're doing is we're cooking seaweed, and then that seaweed soup we feed into a bacteria that gets fat with our product. The name of our product is PHAs. So PHAs are natural materials that mimic plastic very well, but they are made with natural resources, and at the end of the life, you can choose between reusing, recycling, and most importantly, home compost. So it gives you the optionality at the end of its life. And we are very excited about bringing this upstream solution into the mix and hopefully help build a bioeconomy with these progressive seaweed-derived materials.
Do you call PHA, is it a bioplastic? Would you call it that, or do you try and distinguish it from a bioplastic?
Yeah, so that, again, depends which scientist you ask, and I'm actually part of a non-
Depends which marketing person you ask, eh?
No, I mean, I'm an oceanographer by background, and I fall in love with this material and then decided that the best way to bring that to reality is through a for-profit. But I come from the research side, and one side gig I have is with this non-for-profit called Go PHA, and what we're trying to convince the policymakers is that PHA belongs on the same class as, like, let's say, silk and cardboard and natural materials, because plastics or bioplastics, they are what we call synthetics, so they are human-made. We invented a new polymer that nature didn't know, and therefore it's hard to put in a bio-recycling environment. And these PHAs, they are created by bacteria. Cellulose is going to be the tree. And what's special about those natural materials is that nature produced them, so nature can biodegrade more easily. So in my opinion, answering your question, I would say PHA is not a plastic, but it depends who you ask.
But you're actually seeking to replace plastics, aren't you? So what you're creating a kind of feedstock. What can you make out of that?
So yeah, what's special about PHAs is that despite it being a natural material, it mimics plastic so well that when you touch and feel that, you believe it's plastic. So what is special about this natural material is that it repels water. So it's waterproof, it's windproof, and you can melt and remelt, so you can actually recycle just like plastic. So in theory, we can go into anywhere where plastic goes, we can go with PHA, technically. Of course, production cost has to go down for us to be able to do that.
I'm glad you brought up cost. That's the next question I'm going to get to. Just quickly, because you just said it repels water. This is one of the things that I have constantly struggled with in the kind of war and waste documentaries, is because people go, hey, you know, we're replacing plastic with a bioplastic. And then actually legislation nowadays tends to ban bioplastics the same way it bans plastics, because, for instance, you're an ocean background. If you say, if I make a plastic that can repel water and is as strong as plastic, and I make it out of algae, if I drop it back in the ocean, it still won't break down in the ocean. It will create the same problem that a fossil fuel plastic will, won't it?
So PHAs, this class of material, is going to behave a little bit like cellulose. It has a biodegradability profile very similar to to wood, let's say. So here we have like a little wax comb, so on the surfing team, made with PHA, so if you touch it, it feels like plastic. Of course, if you lost that at sea, it's going to take a while, just like if it was made of wood. But yeah, if it releases microplastics, which have a much wider surface area for those microbes to attack the material, it's going to biodegrade eventually. So it's technically what we call marine biodegradable. You can go, there is a TUV certification in Europe that you can actually call it marine biodegradable, just like wood is. But that doesn't mean that you can be throwing wood or PHAs in the ocean and expect it to disappear in 2 days. It depends on the material type. It depends on the shape of your object, and it also depends the environment where the object is. So let's say a home compost, much more bacteria in there to consume the PHA. The ocean is cold and much less microbes, so it takes a while.
We'll come back to the waste side of it later on. Peter, when you're talking about making something that looks like plastic or works like plastic, and you say, but we've changed the process we're using algae now. What are the benefits from a carbon perspective, from a climate change perspective there?
That goes exactly back to what Estonium's doing. So if we can find replacement components to go into producing, you know, the plastic housing on my phone, if we can take out half of the fossil carbon and replace it with a biogenic carbon, then it's going to halve its product carbon footprint. That's going to then store the carbon in our useful devices. So I think what Estonium is doing, and what I think a lot of the bioeconomy is going to be doing, is looking for ways that we can find drop-in technology that can go into making products that we, the community, needs to buy every year. We need to, I don't want to be throwing my phone out or throwing my plastic casing out all the time, but this is a way we can store atmospheric carbon by using existing supply chains and just substituting a bio raw material and taking out the fossil one.
Is algae, though, better than some biomaterials? Because, so for instance, I've read life cycle assessments of a lot of bioplastics nowadays are based on corn, right?
Yep.
And if you actually look at the life cycle, you go, what we did is we cut down a forest and we planted lots of corn, and then we dug up the corn and then we used that to make this plastic. And you look at it and go, hang on a second, this is worse than a fossil fuel sometimes.
Yep.
That happens at times. Does algae overcome some of those problems because of where it can be grown, whether it be in your lava lamp in your office or in the ocean or wherever it is? Does it overcome some of those problems? Because not all bioproducts are the same.
Absolutely, and this is where the food versus fuel debate comes in. We cannot be growing algae in land that should be arable. We need to be growing food in those lands. Algae grows in saline water, algae grows in wastewater, algae grows in brine water, algae grows in the ocean. So places that we're not currently using, we can grow the biomass, and I think that's really important. You know, some of our partners are using wastewater from aquaculture. That is doing a service to making sure that the water that leaves that farm doesn't pollute the rivers, but it's also making a product that we can use. So understanding where algae doesn't compete with land production, that's what we want to use.
So that's one of the benefits there. Alex, we heard Amy talking about, you know, the challenge of making this new product that's also affordable. When you are dealing with companies to try and get a product here, you're trying to smash these amazing things of science that we've created here, but you've also got this criteria of, but it has to be affordable, and, you know, we've got to be able to sell this in Target and that. How much does that constrain the kind of big sky thinking of scientists, or how much is that the exciting part of the challenge?
Yeah, it can definitely form part of the challenge, but I guess the exciting part is that I think when I started this job, I thought, you know, oh my gosh, it's going to be huge multinationals coming to us. They want to change the planet. They've got all the money. They're going to do all these amazing things. It's not. It's small businesses, it's startups, it's people that are more agile, that are taking this risk upon themselves and investing in research and going, yeah, we know this is going to be expensive, potentially in the short term, but this isn't a short-term problem and we can't come up with short-term solutions. So it's really interesting to see that it's smaller companies and people that are entrepreneurial that are jumping in on this. And that's, I think, the most exciting part. And, as Amy said, it's that kind of incremental change. It's that continually reiterating and going, okay, we're going to get you a product that is 40% algae and it's going to be expensive, but then we think we can get up to 50% and we might get it cheaper. And guess what? There's a new farm down the road that has this seaweed as waste, so we think we can then go cheaper. And I think that's the thing, right, is we're so used to stuff happening so quickly, but all this research stuff takes a long time, and it's taken us a long time to have this problem on our planet. So, it is going to take us a little bit of time to come up with those solutions that are going to get us over that next step. But I think that's the most exciting part, is it's these smaller people who are going, yeah, I want to start tackling this. I'm going to take this risk upon myself. I'm going to put my business on the line, and I want to come up with a solution.
But that's what I find so interesting.
Can I just put an extra point to where Alex was going? It's the smalls, the SMEs that are going to take on the risk, but we've also got to have leadership from entire industries. And I think that's where Estonian fits in, where you've got the car industry, you've got the chemical industry. We would love to have the construction industry, to have entire industries thinking about these problems. That takes leadership, and it's not coming from the SMEs and the small guys. We've got to have both ends of the market, both ends of industry solving these problems. And I think that's a key part.
And I'll come back to Estonian in 2 seconds. I just want to quickly, to wrap up that point there, what I find fascinating about piping hot in a way is that, we're not talking about the Byron Bay boutique where you pay, an extra $50 because it's organic and it's got a low carbon footprint, it's got this kind of thing. You're selling in Target, you don't have a green premium of this kind of thing. That's a much bigger challenge in a way. But what I love about that challenge is it's also about getting it to a much bigger audience, which is what we have to do. I'm not interested in selling green products to greenies. I'm interested in selling green products to everyone. So how much harder has that made it? I'll start with you, Alex, and then come to you, Amy.
Where do I start? Okay, how has that made it harder? I think the whole thing is, this stuff needs to be accessible. So it needs to come from a lot of different people, a lot of different businesses, and honestly, it needs to happen over and over and over and over again. It's not just about one product being more accessible to people that's, more climate friendly or captures more carbon. It's like, when people start to realise this is happening with all the different products that we consume on a daily basis, then I think it starts to become, a bigger solution altogether. It's not just these little incremental tiny things in one particular industry. So I think, it's kind of interesting. And people, I don't think charging a green premium on things, I have all sorts of thoughts on that, but it can kind of also come with its own issues, right? Like if you're charging more because a product is more sustainable, you're automatically pricing out a whole bunch of people that maybe do want to make a change, but aren't able to access it in the same sorts of ways, which is kind of wrong. And yeah,
look, don't get me started. Every tax should be done in a way so that the most environmentally friendly option is the cheapest option. It just doesn't happen right now.
Why doesn't that happen?
Well, it's weird that. Why doesn't that happen? We might get to that later on. Amy, how do you juggle this kind of balance of going, we have to be affordable, but we're trying to do the right thing? It's difficult.
Yeah, look, when we started on this journey, we transformed every aspect of our business and our operations. So, we directed our funds in a different way, we're buying in a different way, we're speaking to our suppliers in a different way. And it is a really beneficial relationship for us to have distribution through Target, because it does enable us to be able to deliver across the country, and we're not fighting to win over lots of small retailers to stop, like independent surf stores, to say, buy this product, and then they feel like it's a risk. We've been in partnership with Target since the 1990s, and at the same time, we are under no illusions that I would say more than 80% of the customers who buy our product from Target have no idea that we're actually doing anything in relation to sustainability, because when you shop in that kind of store, you have no one to tell you that. Because of greenwashing concerns and all those things, we have the opportunity for us to communicate what we're doing to our customers at the point of purchase is a swing tag on the side of a product. And the wording on that is so carefully guarded and checked, because we have to have all of the background to say, how confident are we that that product contains algae, contains recycled content? That we are, recently we had to prove that actually we're actually doing anything for clean oceans. I say all of that because the challenge remains in a difficult retail economic environment, that the product still needs to look good, fit well, perform with quality, compete with everything else on the floor, and so it's absolutely a challenge.
It's huge barriers there. Gunther, I want to come back to you and talk about Estonium, and also your work with Siemens and Sea Green. Do you notice on an international level, when you're dealing with countries that have, positive climate policies and CBAM and that companies that come from that background are coming to you and saying, how do we solve this problem? We need the data and that. Whereas countries that may be well and truly behind, and I potentially throw Australia into that mix, are much less likely to be approaching you and realising that this is the next step they have to be doing.
So you're asking if we can see a differentiation how companies are acting on that?
Do you see that European companies that have grown up with, carbon taxes and with CBAM coming and that are much more proactive in looking into their product carbon footprint than are countries from perhaps America or Australia, for instance?
I think it's more on a company level. I mean, when you look at the top 500 companies, all of them normally have already a sustainable pledge out there, and they are, of course, depending that they are delivering on this pledge because they are on an international stock market. So there are different reasons. So first of all, of course, they are measured by their impact and sustainability impacts. And if you have a pledge out, of course, you have to first of all, you have to set a target. That is very important. And this target must be publicly, of course, published. No? So, and then you have to take actions accordingly to the target, and you need to allow that that you are going to be measured on these targets, and then of course you have to prove that you are getting the impacts by these measurements. So yes, of course we see this, and when we are looking into the Siemens, we have actively, of course, supplier development programs, and also our politics in place where we actively asking our suppliers what they are doing to going into direction of net zero, and how they are reducing and how they are contributing to reduce the carbon emissions. And that is a part of the supplier evaluation. And then there is a regular, of course, we check this regularly with our suppliers. And if we see, of course, then we are also supporting them by making more impact in reducing their carbon emissions. So, and as also we see them that our customers are asking us this. So yes, there is a huge tendency of the industry in this direction. It comes with the upcoming regulations also, not only to this, let's say, pledge what they have given out and the stock market, but there's also pressure from regulations. And there's, of course, from society, a lot of, let's say, awareness, and companies need to react accordingly. And last but not least, also the financial market are more and more supporting sustainable companies with lower credits and financing programs. So there we see a lot of reasons and activities in this area.
And I like that answer because it shows that there are so many different pressures. It's coming from the community, it's coming from people who purchase things, it's coming from the financial community, it's coming from policy. It comes from so many different aspects. And I think whenever I get asked what's the most important thing, it's like, well, kind of everything. Let's just look at everything. Talking about that, Alex, you worked on the Developing the Australian Algae Industry White Paper. What are the main changes in policy or incentives or financial incentives that you need to see algae become the thing?
So I guess to give a little bit of context, so the global algae industry, people may be surprised to know that in Europe and America, algae industry is actually quite big. They are probably 10 years ahead of us in terms of the number of farms, the policy that supports it, the financing that supports it, the types of products you get on shelves. Like if you go into any of those like super expensive supermarkets in the US, probably seen them all on, you know, your Instagram and that sort of thing. So many of those products have algae stuff in it and they charge through the roof for it. So it's a really big industry. When we look at Australia, the question I get asked whenever we go overseas is, why don't you guys have more companies? Because you have the land, you have the species, you have such a collection of researchers that occur in Australia. Like there is a really big cluster of these people in Australia. Yet the number of businesses we can kind of count on a couple of hands, which is pretty wild. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So when I started, right? Yeah?
Yeah, well, it's amazing. That's great. Let's ask one of those businesses now. I mean, Julia, what are the, you know, obviously people are going, why don't you have more of these companies in Australia? Do you find it hard to compete with others overseas doing this? Like is Ulu trying to compete with others overseas? Or have you got a unique product you think here?
I mean, Ulu, we take it a bit a different approach with we're competing with fossil plastic, which is a massive market, and what we see is that by getting together, we're stronger because it's very often that you go to a large brand, be a car manufacturer or furniture or packaging, and maybe single-use packaging, not so much, but you're like, have you heard about PHAs? Have you heard about how we grow seaweed? And that there is some seaweed for us to start in Southeast Asia. And there is a lot around educating the market. And I think that we get a great culture with the vast majority of the seaweed businesses. And we try to kind of collaborate and work on different, because we're basically inventing a supply chain from scratch. And there is so much that needs to be done. That's not going to be one single winner. You know, it's all the way from cultivating that seaweed, getting the sugars and the protein separated in the right way, then producing those raw materials, turning them into pellets, be it aquafeed pellets or plastic pellets, and then making them into products is such a massive problem that I like to be optimistic as well. When I started to work on the plastic pollution and climate change space, back in, well, climate change was 2002, and then plastic in 2009, we were so behind on where we're at least the conscience is there and people are aware of those problems, and I think we just need to accelerate that change. So I think from my perspective, I'm thankful where we're at. Of course, we need to keep going and accelerating that, but overall, I think we're in a good trajectory, and I think this audience is a good example of that.
Well, and also when you talked about, Alex, you mentioned Australia being a good place for this. Peter, what are the advantages, what are the natural advantages we have in Australia? You know, what gives us a competitive advantage? Why are we in a good position for biomanufacturing here?
So I think what's going to happen is we need to be aware, as Julia mentioned, supply chains and biomanufacturing. To keep the carbon costs down, we need to grow the biomass, whether or not it's trees, seaweeds, microalgae. We need to grow them close to the production facility, and I think that's what the change in biomanufacturing is going to be, is that we're going to have supply chain production very close. And so that means we're not going to grow the algae here in Australia, ship it to China or to Europe to produce. And I think that's why we shouldn't see Australia as being behind, but we should be part of the international market, and we just got to find out which of the markets we're going to be working in, because we're not, the technology that we've got is appropriate across the globe, but you're going to grow your biomass next to where you do the production. You are not going to be shipping seaweed or algal biomass across the globe.
I mean, it always does my head in, actually, when you kind of look at a bioplastic and it's like, what, we ship this from some cornfield in America? It's like, I always go, that seems insane. But anyway, I'm glad we're going to grow it here now. Let's go to the end of life of these types of products now. And Gunther, I want to start with you. When you're assessing the actual product carbon footprint of a product, do you assess the end of life, the disposal of it, or are you just looking at it up to the point of leaving the factory and going out to be sold?
When we are from the Estanium Association point of view, we are looking from a cradle to grave, so completely, of course. It is important that we are tracking. I say always, we're tracking the carbon along the complete life, and looking forward that they are also then. Taking out of the atmosphere and stored. When we're looking on the available solutions, what we have at the moment, and here it is at the moment most seen that the products are going um, from the let's say from the start of the production till to the point where they are delivered to the user. So there are just a few products on the market which really are where you're tracking over the whole life cycle their impact by a company. So we are from Estanium looking from cradle to grave, and solutions are out there just from to only upstream, not downstream, let's say. What is the problem here? If you really would like to track and trace carbon emissions, you need to verify them. So you need to verify the data you are collecting. So when somebody gives you an information, then normally you can trust this information, which is let's say only possible if you have a close relation with them, or you are allowed to look into their processes to get proof of it. But in normal business relations, you are not allowed to look into the processes because normally you get access to confidential information. So when you are then getting information, you need a proof or verifiable credentials. And then when it goes to multiple users, then downstream, then of course you have the problem who is the consumer behavior and so on. So it's still a problem which is it's difficult to solve. So, but for industrial part, yes, we have a complete solution in place where we get the proof of each production step, and it's verified without disclosing the confidential information. And we are aiming, of course, to close this loop completely and get the track. But there are also some examples out there which are trying to close this loop. We are working on a holistic carbon ecosystem with governments in Mexico, where we are really trying to close this loop. But here you need systemic level collaboration. You need to really to work together with the governments and with the industry and of course with academia.
Absolutely. And Amy, I guess that the consumer point goes to what you were mentioning right at the beginning. It was like, hey, we're trying to do all these good things and change the place, but we can't actually track every person that buys our board shorts and go, so just email us back. Did you wear it 100 times or did you wear it 3 times and throw it out or chuck it in the ocean? You know, it's hard for you to follow that kind of whole process, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have the kind of two approaches. One is that in that period of design, we think about what the end of life will be in the generalised, is it biodegradable? Will it, live forever like a plastic? What's the trajectory if you look at cradle to grave? However, when we measure our product impact, which is something that we do so that we can more closely assess and then communicate to our customers what we're doing in terms of our environmental steps. We look at the cradle to store because we feel much more confident about that accuracy and we can control that part. Once it goes out there, we just want to be able to, on our side, know that yes, we've considered what the very end of life will be, whether or not someone wears a garment several times. Yeah,
it's hard to track that. The reason I ask that, and I'm interested in it, but Peter, I'll come to you on this. Let's look at this comb I've been given that's been made of a natural product. And I'll come to you on this, Julie, obviously, as well. In Australia at the moment, a recent study showed that most bioplastics that are used end up in landfill. in Australian landfills, when a bioplastic breaks down, it breaks down anaerobically, so it breaks down without oxygen, which, like food and other organic processes, leads to methane. So, do we need to be changing, if we're going to be changing our system to be, changing to bioproducts like this, do we need to be changing our whole end-of-life process as well? Because at the moment, if I chuck that into landfill, it's going to have a negative impact, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've got to start valuing is the carbon. The carbon that's in that comb, we need to put a value on it so that it's not disposed of. I'm going to take the example a little bit bigger than the comb. I'm going to imagine this carpet on the floor, or imagine wall panellings or ceiling panellings. Imagine the construction industry, which is the largest emitter of CO2. Imagine if the construction industry valued its carbon and it stuck carbon into these floor panels, and we sold that carbon as a carbon offset. And the building valued that carbon and said, okay, for the next 10 years, I'm going to recognise the value of that, and when I do rip it up, and if I do put it in landfill, I'm going to lose my carbon credits for it. So I think there is a strategy that governments around the world can start valuing carbon in products. Bigger than a comb, but certainly the same concept.
Yeah, but it's interesting. But Julia, it's an interesting balance for you, right? Because you can probably, right now, you can probably sell to the public a lot easier if you say, we've created this product out of an algae, and unlike plastic that stays in landfill for 1,000 years, this breaks down in the environment, right? That'll sell a lot better. I know this. Everyone always comes up to me, oh, I love this because it doesn't... The worst thing about plastic is it doesn't break down in landfill. And I say to them, ironically, that's the best part of plastic. It doesn't break down in landfill. So it's actually a carbon store. It's a fossil fuel that's been dug up and put back in landfill and it'll stay there for 1,000 years. Ironically, the only good thing about plastic. So you have a challenge in a sense, because to the public you can probably go, I'll make this breakdown product. But if we did kind of track it, if you said, actually, I can make this comb, or whatever you're making, I could make this as long-lasting as normal fossil fuel plastics, but I'll make it out of algae, and I will store that carbon for 1,000 years, that's another way you can go. That's a kind of challenge for you at the moment, and we don't really have the, what needs to change for you to make those different decisions.
Yeah, it's and I think it's like in terms of Ulu, we made 2 design decisions from start. One is upstream, related to upstream, which is using seaweed rather than fossil fuels or land crops as the input material. And the other one was PHAs as the material that we're going to make, that we're going to produce with that seaweed. And that's really thinking about that end of life. And I think, people say, but if the wax comb is not made of plastic, it's not going to last a lot. Or if your textile, which this one is also made of seaweed with the same material as that one, if it's made like that, my T-shirt is not going to last. And you can ask your grandmother, things used to last longer before the plastic come in. And we had much more home compost as well and better ways to deal with it. So I think that for me at least, is the realization that there is no such a thing as things lasting forever. It's good to get the carbon, make something, but the carpet or this textile or the wax comb, at some point, we need to find a solution for that. And I think for those working on the material space, it's very important to give the optionality of either going to recycling or going to compost. Now, us alone, we're not going to solve the problem. Like, for instance, Ulu does not want to go to single-use packaging yet. People say, why not work on single-use packaging? That's where they need PHAs. The issue there is that we need first to scale composting. So not only home composting, but also community composting, where the PHAs and the food waste can go into. Because otherwise, you have the seaweed grabbing the CO2, becoming a product, and then the product ends up on the landfill, where that carbon is released as methane. And the methane is more powerful as a gas than the carbon. So overall, we do not want either your food or your biological materials to end up on the landfill. So we need to make landfill something of the past.
Absolutely. But the interesting thing about what I think Peter was talking about earlier, where you talk about this becoming a carbon store, is it's the next step. Because if we take it in to our product, we store it for 20 years, we put it into compost, essentially what you get there is a biogenic process which is neutral. Yeah. So it doesn't create any more carbon dioxide, it just releases it through the, in a perfect composting situation, it releases it. But Peter, you're talking about the next step, which is going, no, we're not releasing it, we're storing it.
Yep.
Do you think we're actually able to do that? Like what products can we, and how long do you have to store it for? Like if I'm going to say my roofing panel is made out of algae, how long do I have to prove that that's stored for 100 years, 1,000 years? Do I have to prove that my great-grandson will have this roofing panel?
No. So there's options. So there's another plastic. This one is seaweed-based, and that one is permanent plastic. So if that's put into landfill, it stays there, and it doesn't break down quickly. There's a lot of options for us to use landfills that don't make methane as vaults, so that if things don't break down, we can store that carbon and it's out of the atmosphere. It's not functional, it's not useful, but at least it's stored out of the atmosphere. I think a lot of the plastics we need to be using is ones that can be repurposed. So you take this plastic, you use it for 10 years as a chair, you chip it and you remould it into a tabletop and you use it for another 10 years. But if it does break down, you're going to have that as methane, as Julia said. And so this is one of the challenges, is where do you store the carbon? And the more carbon is stored in commodities that we need every day, the better we're going to fix the planet. So this is where carbon is now seen as a good guy if we can stick it into products, permanent products.
And Alex, as I said, you've done the white paper on this. Is this something that, is government thinking about this? Is there kind of conversations happening about this stuff? Or how far ahead are we looking here?
Yeah, so I think there's conversations happening around particular circularity, right? I think everyone in the last couple of years has become very familiar with the term like circular economy. I feel like a few years ago, maybe pre-COVID, we didn't even know that that was a thing. But I think circularity is certainly a thing that's becoming more prevalent, and how can we start to introduce like biological processes as a part of that circular process? I think in terms of using some of our like what we call nature-based solutions, which is, can we implement something like algae that helps us to treat wastewater and then also turn that into a product that stores carbon? It's becoming, I think, more at the front of people's minds, and we're starting to see it more and more pop up in government policy. In places like the US, this has been happening for a really long time, and they put, I'm not joking, billions of dollars behind implementing these solutions at scale. So we have a blueprint for how countries can take this and scale it and implement these solutions and start to make massive changes. So I think it's happening, but I think one of the things that we were talking about beforehand was, we talk a lot about solutions. I think that's one of the big things that a lot of these people on the panel have in common is we talk about solutions, right? But you can talk about solutions till the cows come home. If people don't know that there's a problem, then they're not going to start investing in the solution. So I think it's almost like sometimes we have to take a step back and start talking a little bit more about the problem and why there are certain things that are solutions, and why Australia might be perfectly positioned to innovate in these solutions. Then it starts to become more of a thing that we can start to see happen and change and make a difference.
Well, I personally find algae, and I've learned a lot about algae tonight, and I find it fascinating, and I'll be watching algae for a great deal for the rest of the future. Now, let's go to the audience here, and my God, like algae, it has grown while we've been having this conversation. It's massive. So put your hand up if you have a question, and we'll try and get a microphone to you. All right, so we've got a question over here. We'll go over this side.
Hello. Is algae related to wastewater treatment plants in any way?
As in used in wastewater treatment plants? Yeah, it is. There's a couple of places in Australia where they're using algae to polish the last stage of wastewater treatment. So suck up those last bits of nutrients before it goes into rivers and is released as like safe water. And I think in the States it's been used for a very, very long time. And then they take that algae and turn it into things like printer ink on Patagonia, swing tags.
So you're saying that the saying you can't polish a turd is wrong thanks to algae?
Yeah.
This is amazing. We're going to have to change sayings as well.
You
What a
can't
breakthrough.
polish a turd unless it's with algae.
Yeah, there you go. There's a T-shirt for you scientists. Hands up. Do you want to grab us another one? Sir, do you want to take it up to the second row there, so we'll go them next? No. Oh, yeah, okay. This lady. Yes.
I'm wearing an A made of nylon flowers, and I want to know whether I could make these out of algae rather than nylon.
You've got the ream in front of you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a cellulose-based product that's come from seaweeds. So yes, we could make it. Julia's got a swatch of fabric. So yes, absolutely, in a heartbeat.
And this is it. The bioplastics can generally make the same things, and they can look the same way and replace it. And that's their power. But it's also the difficulty for a system going forward. We've got to be able to distinguish between them. We've got a question up here. Yes, sir. Madam, I can't even see you, but I have no idea who you are.
I'm an old fogey born in the 1940s. Everything was made to last, or it came out of nature, so it didn't cause the problems that we have these days. I've been looking at waste issues since 1993, and to me it seems that we need to put a value on products when we buy them. I would like to know what you think about it. If we buy products, that there's a carbon price as a deposit, and it needs to be a meaningful deposit. And when the thing cannot be repaired, we return it, we get our deposit back, just like with bottles. But industry must take it back. Industry must be responsible for their waste. It is not our waste.
Here. I mean, I think it's called extended producer responsibility. Yes. Look, where are we moving? There has been a look into extended producer responsibility in Australia. It's done at a very limited level. Is that, from anyone on the panel, is that an important part? Gunter, is that an important part of making a step forward, is bringing in this extended producer responsibility where companies have to take back their products and deal with it at the end of life?
Absolutely. It was a perfect point taken by, the person, I didn't remember the name. Yes, when we are looking and when we are thinking through the circularity approach, so when we are going through the R0, refuse completely, maybe here also refusing is the first step. No, don't do it, don't build it, don't buy it. And then you go over, then rethink, and then you're coming to the repair, refurbish, reuse, and then recycle. When we think it through, then at the end, we must admit that it leads to new business models. And the new business model is that we are not, and this is just hypothetical, that at the end, we are not selling products. The industry is not selling products, they are leasing them, so they stay the owner. And with the responsibility, of course, when it goes through the all R9 topics, that the industry at the end needs to take the product back, or at least to be responsible for the materials used after at least this life of this product. And I totally agree to this, what we just said.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly enforces. Oh, sorry, going to go.
Yeah, and I would like just to name that that the industry goes into this direction, and I would like to give you two examples. The automotive industry goes into this direction. So when I look on the project Catena X, it's of course that's a more an European project, but here the complete cycle needs to be applied. So the circularity cycle. So the automotive industry is getting to be responsible for taking back their products, and also from the industry. I just bring this. This is our product. We are laser printing an QR code on it. And with this QR code, we have a digital twin of the product, which allows us then to identify our products during the life cycle. And when the customer is scanning them accordingly to the health situation of the product, then the customer gets recommendations what to do with this product. Should this product be repaired due to the health situation, or should it be refurbished, or should it be recycled, and where to do this? I mean, we are thinking in this direction, and we are taking also actions into this direction.
That would make it a lot easier for us if there's a QR code on things that we could figure out what to do with it. That's great. Let's go to another question in the audience. We've got one here in the blue.
Hi, thank you very much for this evening, and I really applaud all of you that are working on solutions at the production end through to what is really the problem that everybody seems to have, is what we do with it at the waste end. The segregation seems to be the issue. All of the products that you're producing, that you're talking about producing now, they'll get mixed in with plastics and metals and everything else, and they end up in landfill. I spent a lot of time visiting waste transfer stations and landfills, and even staff at those places cannot recognise the different products, and everything just gets pushed into a great big hole. Isn't that really where the challenge is? Doesn't that really make your products more viable if there is a process at the end to do something meaningful with it?
Can I answer, Julie? Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good question, and I think I take that one very personally, because I'm an ocean scientist, and I started by looking at like the stomach of wildlife, and so much plastic. And then you go into waste management, and you go to Indonesia, and there are kids breathing plastic. And what you realize is that you need to stop upstream. Is very important to bring that solution. So I think, like, let's say PHA, talking about extended producer responsibilities. Let's say I have a container for a cosmetics. You're a business. You can return that container, and then you do what with it if it's made of black plastic? Maybe you can afford the composting. You cannot do recycling. You can, burn it and get toxic smoke. So I think is when you go to that pile on the landfill that you realize that we need to change the material. And some people say, the bioplastic is going to disrupt the plastic recycling. Which recycling? So does the plastic contaminate the compost as well, which is something we need. Food waste is massive, methane release. So I think yes, that's the problem, but how do we make the feedstock easier to process, be it at the household if we are a community, be at the company level, when you get the product back, what do? You need to go more fragmented, or be the government, which is currently playing a massive bill, trying on the rich countries, not in Brazil or Indonesia. So I think the thing is, like, of course, I became a plastic producer in a way, but it's kind of with that in mind and the realization that we need to move towards better. We need to leave the fossil fuel on the ground, and we need to move towards something that's cost-effective for everybody. And in my opinion, I believe that composting is a massive part of the problem, a massive part of the solution, particularly for what's called polymers, which is plastic. You can melt and remelt. That one is a recycled wax comb that we did in our lab. You'll just melt again and use again. But that's not like metal that you can, or glass that you can hot wash and use forever. We believe that polymers, plastics, belong on the bioeconomy, and we need a better solution there. So absolutely, it is a waste problem, but part of that solution is upstream and making that something that we as people at home, we as a business, and we as a government can cost-effective have a solution for that, rather than just dumping somewhere.
That's where extended producer responsibility again goes to that, because if you return to the company, they know, our packaging, we can recycle it, or we can compost it, or we can do something else. But when it's all thrown in together, it's an absolute nightmare. And yeah, this is a big part of it, how we fix that up. Next question from the audience. I think we're at the back. Who's got the next? Do you want to give it to somebody, sir?
Hi there, my name is John Phipps. This is a question for Peter Ralph. I was really curious about the potential for algae being used as a feedstock for biochar or hydrochar, and whether or not that process can be carbon negative.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities with biochar using algae, specifically seaweed. And I think we've got to be careful that biochar is almost a get out of jail card. It's the last step in the process. So you take your high value products off, you do things, and then what's left at the end, you'll pyrolyse and put it in as biochar. But that's a kind of a low value product. There's not a lot of money in it, but there's some higher value, I'll call them pyrolysis products, but biochar. So yeah, biochar is important. And I think going forward, that's going to be one of the vaults that we can create for storing our carbon. You know, we create the biochar and have it in the soil and increase the soil carbon. So yeah, that's definitely a future solution. Okay, we had another question here. So.
I'm gonna try to squeeze 3 questions. So one,
Sir, pick your favourite one.
Okay. Okay. So I just want to hear a bit more discussion on how this leasing model of the economy with plastic recycling is gonna work in the economy.
Anyone want to jump on the leasing model? Can I lease some piping hot pants?
Not at the moment, but I mean the fashion industry is actually there's a lot of emerging models for leasing and renting clothes. I don't think that people are comfortable renting other people's swimwear, so that is probably a hazard.
Really, the leasing will be at a higher cost items, won't it? Really, you know.
It tends to be occasion wear that people are comfortable leasing, rather than, like I say, swimwear, which is, you know. Yeah, you typically wouldn't lend it to too many people. I guess there are also take-back schemes. So there are ways of, and new technologies that exist to be able to recycle textiles to textiles. We have removed all of the polyester from t-shirts and hoodies, which seems like a strange thing, but a lot of garments are made as a blend with cotton and polyester. One of the easy kind of decisions that we could make to kind of apply circular design principles was to actually just say, we don't need it. Consumers are really trained to like the softness of that fabric, and it's cheaper to produce. We struggle sometimes to sell the fleece, you know, the sweatpants and the hoodies at Target because customers really like that soft fabric that is a blend. However, it's important for us, in order to, I guess, influence that end of life scenario. This is not necessarily to do with the leasing, but it's about also how are we engaging in better solutions that at least minimise the impact of our products in that waste stream and prepare our products so that they can fall into the available waste streams that are present now. And there are, you know, Samsara Eco is a really great example of an Australian technology, which is actually recycling nylon to nylon. And those kinds of extended use for textiles are really exciting. For us, we currently make our products out of recycled cotton, but we're not yet able to close the loop on a textile, like, you know, using recycled cotton garments to then make new recycled cotton garments, simply because sourcing the recycled cotton or the used cotton garments in an effective way to the volume that we would need to be able to convert that into recycled cotton is incredibly problematic right at this moment.
Do you think if people knew that their like twin set trackies were made from fossil fuels, that they would be more inclined to go for something that has no polyester in it?
I have always hoped that the answer was yes. However...
Can I answer that? I did a stunt based on this in the last War on Waste. We went up to people and we went up to people firstly saying, do you realise what you're wearing is plastic? People were mystified by that. When we then showed them oil and said, that is your clothing is made of oil, they were doubly mystified by it. So no, I think most people, it's like people are coming to terms with this now. When you talk about polyesters and all this kind of stuff, people do not know the next processes. I mean, people in this room probably do, but it's not the major thing. So that's part of the education process that has to go on as well. Yeah. We'll go to the audience. Probably got time for 1 to 2 more questions. Yes, sir, you've got the mic there, yes.
Yeah, hi. Question about scalability. So we're at around 50 gigatons per year of emissions in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent. Even by mid-century, the net in net zero is perhaps 10 billion tonnes a year of drawdown that we need to do. So how well can these algae-based solutions scale? Because it feels like an awful lot of plastic combs.
I don't think we're solely relying on the plastic combs. I mean, that's doing about 10 billion gigatons. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Peter, do you want to answer that, or Alex?
Well, I think there's 3 parts to that. 1, do we have a choice? No, we have to do something. 2, I don't think algae is the only solution in all of this. There are a lot of other solutions out there, but I think it has a really, really important part to play. And 3, yeah, they're totally scalable. Like when we think about, it's not just, and this is why it's so exciting, right? It's not just about plastic combs. It's about new fabrics. It's about new sources of food. It's about new animal feed. It's about aviation fuel. You know, these are all industries that are huge in terms of their emissions and are going to have to find a solution really, really quickly. And it might not be about completely substituting out every single carbon emitting product that they're using. It's that kind of step change thing. But, you know, I think when we look at it, they are scalable. It's going to take a lot of other solutions packed in there as well. But we also don't have the choice. You know, there's no looking back now. The only way to go is mitigation. And when this is such a great option, particularly when it targets so many different industries, it's completely viable.
And can I ask you a question on the kind of financial model? Because when you start saying we can store carbon here, some people, some environmental people will start getting suspicious because they're like, you know, obviously the question of storing carbon has been, hey, we're going to build a gas plant in Western Australia, we're going to store carbon through this mechanism. It hasn't worked or whatever. But, you know, sometimes it's seen as the people who are the fossil fuel polluters are using as an excuse for continuing their business model. How do we ensure that the storage of carbon in algae is done by subtracting something from the atmosphere that doesn't need to be done, or just is not linked to just continuing the business model of carbon polluters?
I'll take that call.
You want to take that bullet?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do apologise. A very last minute bullet.
So there's CCS, carbon capture and storage. We've got to move to carbon capture and use, and that's what we've been talking about today. It's all about how to use the carbon as opposed to store it. The other thing is the elephant in the room. Alex touched on it, and this comes back to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. We've got to start thinking about fuels. So sustainable aviation fuel, the US is looking at 3 billion tonnes of biomass they need to find. That's waste
by 2030. By 2030.
By 2030. So this is a whole raft of biomass. Algae and seaweed is in that puzzle. And this is not taking the carbon out of the atmosphere, but it's replacement. So we're going to create sustainable aviation fuels using biogenic sources, not fossil sources. That carbon's going to come out of the atmosphere, go into a sustainable aviation fuel, get used and go back in. But that's going to at least stop us taking the original fuel from the ground. So I think at scale, we can address some of these big problems and start mitigating the issue with warming the planet.
That's good. I don't know about you, but I feel more positive after this conversation. There are many more questions here. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap now, but our panellists, apart from Gunter, will be outside afterwards. You can ask some questions there. I'd like to thank, please put your hands together for our panellists, Gunter Bakinger, Peter Ralph, Amy Lowe, Julia Heisner, and Alex Thompson. Thank you so much. There'll be drinks in the foyer. If you're online, drinks in the foyer are not guaranteed, but you will if you're in the room, they are. So thanks for coming along to what was a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Craig. And from UTS, thank you to all of you for coming tonight. We really appreciate your support, and I also wanted to thank the team that brought us together, so Jo and her team. So have a great evening, and thank you very much.